Billy Hallowell is a digital TV host for FaithWire, CBN News, and the co-host of Quick Start podcast. Ryan Bethea's podcasts have been downloaded over 20 million times.
There's wonder out there. You don't have all the answers, and that should be freeing for everybody, and that's why we should pursue this stuff.
I just personally like to tackle topics that feel uncomfortable or feel strange to try to make them make sense.
And a car runs through a stop sign and wraps my car around a tree. And I walked away without a scratch.
Miracles, they remind me of true freedom.
Miracles are the evidence of what God is doing.
I felt like there was something evil in the room. It was 3 a.m. I didn't call my dad. And I sprinted into the kitchen and I went to grab the phone and it rang.
And ask them, hey, tell me a crazy moment.
This is actually what it looks like when God is active.
Something bigger than a vibe shift would be a revival, a spiritual awakening.
We the people. Why you quiet? It's time to stand up for the truth. How they coming for our kids, so who gon' stand up for the youth? Ay, and we know we win because Yeshua is the proof. Ay, we the people like Garcia, so there's no excuse.
Billy Hallowell is a digital TV host and interviewer for FaithWire, CBN News, and the co-host of CBN's Quick Start podcast. Hallowell has written more than 14,000 stories on faith, culture, and politics, has interviewed hundreds of celebrities, authors, and influencers, and is the author of 4 books, including Playing with Fire, a modern investigation into demons, exorcisms, and ghosts, and The Armageddon Code, one journalist's quest for end times answers. He was formerly the director of content and communications at PureFlix and the former faith and culture editor at The Blaze. Our second guest, Ryan Bethea, is a host, producer, and writer. He is most well known for his #1 hit podcast, The Exorcist Files, which documents real cases of spiritual warfare from the case files of Catholic priests. Ryan's podcasts have been downloaded over 20 million times, and he just recently released his second hit podcast, Heaven Meets Earth, which just also made the top 10 on Apple religion charts. Ryan has worked with best-selling authors, large brands, and film and TV. He currently has a new project with the United States Special Forces and recently was awarded an executive producer credit for his work on the Smash TV series from Angel Studios, Homestead. Ryan and Billy, what's going on?
Doing well. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, this is exciting. I think people can kind of hear a theme in both of your bios. We're going to get into some fields that aren't always traversed on this show or really in the mainstream, but you all are sort of experts in these areas. And I want to just kind of start right there. No one has documented miracles and spiritual warfare like the two of you have. So my question is, what is it about miracles that captivates people and also yourselves?
Ryan, you want to start with that one?
Oh man, well, it's a miracle just to be here. I mean, I say this as a joke, but in reality, the fact is, we have 3 people located like all across the country on a talking box, recording a conversation every day. I know it sounds like pithy, but like every day is kind of a miracle, right? The fact that we're just alive, just bonkers. Like, and the world we live in right now is just so cool. But no, I think it's important. The world's full of craziness. There's natural disasters. There's evil everywhere. There's darkness. We all know people or directly have endured suffering. Like, it's tough. And that's actually something we can get into, is when you document this stuff, it does lead to the inevitable question of like, well, how come you don't see these miracles all the time? But it's just so important to celebrate, the fact that there is amazingly cool stuff happening. And we just need to be humble about it because it's going on all around us.
Yeah, no, I love that. I think, it's interesting looking, and we could talk about this, but looking at evil, right? And then looking at miracles, because it's sort of two ends of it's like two ends of the coin, right? And for me, I think the thing that interests me the most about these issues is that there are things that everybody's interested in. Every September and October, like half the movies that are out in theaters, if not more, they surround evil, the demonic, right? Like, culture is super fascinated by this because it's part of the human condition. It's part of the intrigue of what is there beyond ourselves. And the same goes for miracles, right? You can get a lot of people interested in miracles. And so while it's not talked about all the time, there is this sort of, it's one of the only areas where Christian and mainstream cross over, where faith and mainstream cross over in really interesting ways. And I just personally like to tackle topics that feel uncomfortable or feel strange to try to make them make sense sense, not only for other people, but mostly selfishly for myself. I just like looking at these things. So it is true, though. I don't know, like Ryan and I were talking about this. I think we're probably two of the only people who have addressed these two things so fervently, right? And they're very different things, but yet they're related in strange ways.
No, we've had a lot of people on this show, some fascinating guests, some wonderful guests. But when it comes to subject matter expertise, I don't know that we've had two individuals that are the leading experts in a topic as the two of you are. And this show, as you all know, celebrates faith, family, and freedom, the United States of America. And I think faith plays a huge role in America. I think it plays a huge role in shaping nations. You know, our founders sort of designed this country on the thesis of morality. So what role do you think miracles and faith play in both shaping a nation? And then what role does faith play in America?
Yeah, I mean, so you hit it on the head, right? Like capitalism's great, like freedom's great, but a republic is great, but you need a moral citizenry to govern. Otherwise you end up with, there's a reason we have an FDA, right? Because unscrupulous capitalism, uncensored, can have some consequences, right? And so it's designed with this populace that is like, has a moral code. And I think, I often think about this just as an experiment. Like if we were, as just like a general rule, like if all of us followed the 10 Commandments, right? Be no murders, right? We wouldn't be chasing after stuff that's not ours. How would our mental health be if we were just like, oh, there's something bigger than me, etc. I mean, at the end of the day, I'm biased, right? I'm a Christian, and I can't speak for Billy, but ostensibly he is too, right? So, but the reality is, like, faith is so important because, having faith, I think, one, gives us solid ground to actually like help like run the country. And then two, if you look at like the most bang for your buck, if we're really going to come at it from that term, like the more I think we can get on board with the fact that there's something bigger, there's something special, there's more wonder out there than we can realize, a lot of the kind of cascading problems will take care of themselves. And I will say, it's funny you mentioned like two experts on miracles, spiritual warfare. I do want to clarify. It's funny. Billy and I have had the privilege of documenting and like interviewing all these people who have experienced these things. I don't know, Billy, I don't want to speak for you, but sometimes I get emails all the time, be like, you're the miracle guy or you're the spiritual warfare guy. And it's like, I want to be very clear. I have recorded some really cool stuff. That does not mean I'm able to perform miracles, with any frequency.
I love that. No, that's so true, right? People will come and they'll ask for help, even spiritually in their home. They're having some issue go on. And I'm like, let me get you to somebody who actually can really help you with this, because I think that's the role you end up being in on this stuff. But I love that question about miracles and faith in America, because honestly, America itself, the very founding of America, when you go through all of it and you look at the series of miracles that it took in order for this country to actually become what it is. And, we live in such a crazy time with the crazy cancel culture and all this stuff that's gone on, where a lot of people want to focus on the negatives of America. And yeah, hello, we're human beings. There's sin. There's all these different things that as humans, we make up a country. Our country has not been perfect. No country is perfect. No person is perfect, especially not Ryan. And so as we're sort of looking at that, though, I think focusing on the sort of the beauty of America and what it took for this country to be formed, the idea that God's hand wasn't involved in that in any way is just wild to me. But I think too, we're living in such a crazy time. Like, how toxic and wild is it that we've told all these young people for decades now that really there's no real truth. You just make up your own truth. It's whatever you think or feel. I think the interesting thing is we're watching a lot of cultural positive changes right now, because people are realizing, oh my gosh, especially young people, that was a lie. It led me down a bad path, and there needs to be something bigger. I know there's something bigger. I want to go out and find what that is. And so we're watching people in real time try to figure that out right now.
Yeah. So Billy, I want to come back to you on that, because you say something there that has sort of been on my mind. I grew up a Christian, been a Christian my whole life, converted to Catholicism about 8 years ago. I've talked about it on this show multiple times. And what I realized was when I made that conversion, I went deep into my faith. And what happened was my sort of spiritual antenna was up at all times. And I realized then that so much was happening around me that It didn't just start happening. It had always been happening around me. But because I was paying more attention, I realized these things in the world and around me and in my world existed. We can call them miracles. We can call them answered prayers. But what I'm getting at is miracles don't make the headlines. I mean, we know what's in the headlines. We know what's in the mainstream news. Why? But they exist. So why aren't miracles talked about more? Why aren't they making the news?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. There's a very complicated and long answer that I'll try to shorten here. I mean, I think for people creating the news, producing it, reporters, all of the people involved in this process, most of these people live, unless we're talking local news, they live in Atlanta, New York, they live in big cities, and you're trained. I mean, I went to journalism school. When you go to journalism school, you're trained to believe you don't have any opinions, you're white as snow, there's no perspective, and that's just not how humans work. We all have opinions, and it's actually a healthier thing for people to be aware of what their opinions are and to understand where they fall on the line so that they're not pretending they're in the middle somehow or that they don't have viewpoints, because what you have is really a media that is conditioned to not talk about these things because they don't believe in them. Not only do they not believe in them, a lot of them, not everybody, there are Christians in media, but the reality is when you look at the polling, the majority they tend to be more progressive people, more secular people. They don't believe in these things, and they're around people who also don't. And so you end up with this bizarre situation where all these people who are actually secular or left or maybe atheistic even, or just disinterested, agnostic, they think that they're in the middle and that, that they're being fair-minded. And so a lot of these stories, it's just not on their radar because they're not around people who would know about those things. Now, having said that, in the past decade, we've seen a number of stories. The movie Breakthrough was based on a kid who fell through the ice and, died for 30 minutes and his mom prayed him back to life. That became a news story and it did become a film. Miracles from Heaven. You can go down the line. There have been a few of those things that have broken through, but that is not the standard. Those are exceptions. And so I think it really does have to do with worldview. And the same thing happens in politics, right? Same with the political worldview. It just sort of gets written out because they don't really know and they're not around those people.
So I think it's appropriate and important in this part of our conversation. We sort of teed everything up. We've talked about where miracles fit in sort of the society we live in. Ryan, how do you define what a miracle is?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I mean, it's by definition something that is miraculous, meaning it's unprecedented, doesn't happen, it's rare. But you bring up a really good question, which is how would you define a miracle? And I thought, to add on something Billy said, everyone believes in miracles at some level. I mean, you mentioned converting to Catholicism. I heard this joke and I try to steal it, but everyone, even the most secular atheist, believes in the Immaculate Conception. They believe that the universe just popped into being, right? There's a miracle we're all, everyone's comfortable with some level of Immaculate Conception. It's just one degree further. And so I think just having an intellectually honest position of it sounds pithy, but it's we are all walking miracles, right? We didn't choose to be born. How do you prove consciousness, origins of the universe? There's a lot of mystery, and I have no problem with mystery and wonder. I mean, part of the challenge of studying this stuff, right now, I have a terrible flu. I sound awful. I'm hacking up a storm. I asked God to heal me this morning, and you know what? I'm still sick. Right. And it's funny. That's the reality of the world we live in. We live in a broken world. There's illness and tragedy, etc. But, you can't let what you see get in the way of all the other good things that are actually happening out there. And so, I think to your question, everyone should understand that we all actually believe in some level of miracle, whether that's the spontaneous creation of matter, the universe coming into being, or just look at the calibration of the universe, right? The fact that we live on the perfectly sized rock that is the perfect distance from the sun and has a moon that's exactly the perfect distance and a ratio. I mean, this is wild. This is from Eric Metaxas's book, which I found fascinating. But the reason we can have eclipses is because the sun is essentially 300. I may mess up the numbers here, but essentially from a ratio, the sun is 300 times larger than the moon, but the moon is that much closer that that's what makes it appear that they can perfectly block each other out. And so you go, all right, what are the odds? What are the odds that it all just came together? And at some level you go, okay, I also use the example, and this is probably a good example to share a story because on a lot of these interviews we'll end up debating the theology of miracles. And I know some people are just all right, what have you actually seen? Here's a small, little example. Right, we interviewed a guy on our show Heaven Meets Earth recently, and he shares a crazy story in many of his talks where he asked the Holy Spirit, he's like, hey, if it's true, if the whole Christian thing's true, and Jesus was right, that he's going to send this Holy Spirit that is somehow in some weird way going to guide and lead us into truth, whatever that means, right? And there's all sorts of debates about what that involvement is, but whatever, right? And he feels this voice, this intuition, this, call it what you will. Hey, this person might be your suspect, right? With nothing, right? And then it ends up leading to a huge bust, and the kid and the guy was a child abductor. And you go, okay, cool, lucky guess, right? Maybe it was intuition, whatever, right? Another example. This one's actually a really good friend of mine. He was at a Christian camp and felt that same, the people who are Christians in the Bible would describe it, as that still small voice, the voice that spoke to Elijah. It's not crazy Elijah, just this thing that you're like, I kind of recognize it, and it sounds like a thought in your head. And he goes, you're supposed to go find a 4-leaf clover and give it to this girl that you don't even know that well. And he's like, it's so weird, but whatever. So he just does it because, what's the harm? Go out so he goes out, finds a 4-leaf clover, brings it to her. She bursts into tears, and she had prayed an hour earlier, like, God, I feel so unseen. She was going through a terrible breakup. And she's like, this sounds silly, but God, if you would just have someone bring me a 4-leaf clover, I would know how loved I am by you, right? And Again, one tiny, small example, and you can easily write that off. There's nothing, quote, miraculous about that other than the odds. But that's ultimately what it comes down to. You hear enough of these stories and you start going, okay, fair question. Why doesn't it happen more often? And that's heartbreaking. I've prayed people into the ground. I've seen God heal, and I've also seen a lot of people, way more, not get healed. And I don't know. I don't know. And that's something I want everyone to hear. But there is still a lot of reasons to celebrate. And those little stories like that, I've collected so many. And the fact is, if you go out hunting for them, you'll find them. And we can debate whether that's the Christian, whether it's God, whether it's whatever it is, right? But the point is, there's wonder out there. You don't have all the answers, and that should be freeing for everybody. And that's why we should pursue this stuff, because it shows you don't know everything, and that will give you a lot of freedom.
Hey guys, it's Gates. Thanks for tuning in. I'm asking you to like, share, and subscribe to the show. I hear that all the time when I watch and listen to podcasts. And now that I have a show, I know the difference that it makes. It really does boost us in the algorithm. And the better we do in the algorithm, the better guests we're going to get, the better content we're going to be able to produce. This show is not mine. It's yours. So in a way, you're helping yourself. So please like, share, and subscribe, and God bless.
Billy, Ryan kind of answered what was going to be my next question, so I'll pass it to you, but I'll preface it with, we had Alex Jones, the founder of the Hallowell app, on the show, and without calling them miracles, he went through miracle after miracle after miracle. We were sort of talking about it in the form of answered prayers, but Ryan's story sort of brought that to light for me. So a question for you, I mean, whether it's your favorite or just the most popular one you tend to talk about, share an unbelievable miracle with us from your work.
You sort of love them all, right, Billy?
Yeah, it's one of those things where people are like, which one really stands out? And the one that stands out to me, and by the way, I love what Ryan was just saying, because I think we all have had those mini miracles. I call them mini miracles, and then there's sort of the major miracles, right? It's the difference of the 4-leaf clover, or, I had one where my daughter had just been diagnosed with scoliosis. She was 6 years old. I was kind of in this panic of like, what are we going to do? This is just going to be a long journey. It's like 9 years. It's not cancer, thank God, but it's going to be hard, and she's going to be in a brace. And like, I was in the car, and I was just like, and this isn't the one I'm going to share, but I want to share because I think it's important. I'm in the car. I live in New York, so there aren't a lot of trucks with Bible verses on the back of them. And I'm in the car kind of upset about this, praying to God, like, God, just give me a sign. It's going to be okay. I just want to know that like we're going to be okay and that we can have peace and get through this. And I look up in that moment, and there's a Bible verse on the truck in front of me, like painted on the back, that specifically spoke to that it would be okay. And in that moment, I had immediate peace. And I was like, I know for me, that's a mini miracle. Like, I know God's giving me that to give me peace. Now, the things that we dealt with in investigating the supernatural miracles, which is our documentary that people can go to cbn.com/supernatural if they want to check it out. What we dealt with were major miracles. And so these are the things that tumors are disappearing, paralysis is going away. They're the things that seem so unbelievable that you go in to investigate. And the one that really stands out to me is this guy, Jeff Markin, who he had a heart attack. He actually got to the hospital, got inside, was about to give them his ID because he wasn't feeling well. He collapses and dies in the hospital. They spend 45 minutes trying to revive this guy, to no avail, could not get him back, no heartbeat. They pronounce him dead. They're going to send him off to the morgue. And this doctor, Chauncey Crandall, who's in the room While this is going on, he was the emergency room doctor. They call the death. Dr. Crandall walks out. He's in the hallway, and he feels God tell him to go back and pray over the body. And he's like, I'm not going to do that. That's ridiculous. He feels prompted again. So he actually turns back, goes into the room while they're preparing this body for the morgue, and starts praying over Jeff Markin's dead body. And as he's praying over the body, he says to the other medical staff in the room, shock him again, shock him one more time. And they're like, we can't do that. He's dead. They go through all the reasons they shouldn't do it. Even if he did come back, he'd be brain dead. They end up shocking him, and immediately this guy gets a heartbeat back. Not only does he get a heartbeat back, but within 2 days, he wakes up completely fine. We interviewed him for the documentary, and it was just a wild story. He had a near-death experience. I won't go into the rest of it because it's a long story, but it's medically documented. We know that this happened. You have this doctor who felt this prompting he could have ignored. At every step, you had these little mini miracles that led up to the big one, and that guy found faith after Jeff Markin as a result of this experience. So it's stuff like that that makes you say, if you're a skeptic, you have to say, okay, well, what in the world went on there? Because I don't have a natural explanation for what happened there.
Very powerful stories that need to be told to a larger audience, a national audience. And along those lines, I'm as guilty as anyone of continuously talking about this vibe shift that our country is going through. And we're going through a vibe shift in so many areas that I think are leading to more true, good, and beautiful. But something bigger than a vibe shift would be a revival, a spiritual awakening. Is there a role for miracles to play in getting this country to have a spiritual awakening?
Yeah, I think so. You look at the growth of non-denominational charismatic Christianity around the world, and a lot of it's been fueled. Actually, I actually pulled a lot of that information from Dr. Candy Brown. Billy's interviewed her for his documentary and show, but she and her husband actually have a nonprofit called the Global Medical Research Institute, and they basically do peer-reviewed research on miracles. And she told me that this is something you see which is fueling the growth of a lot of this stuff around the world. Because at the end of the day, right, and this is one of the conundrums of faith, is that we know experience doesn't lead to lasting change. Anyone can read the Old Testament, and if it's true that the Israelites walked through part of the sea, and then a chapter later, let's go back. There's no amount of miraculous data that you would accept at some level, right? Anyone who's taught a miracle, right, the world eventually crowds it out, etc. But at the end of the day, right, as the Apostle Paul says in Corinthians, right, and in Romans, but did I come to you in word, or did I come to you in power and deed, right? And so there is this idea that if it's true, you should see some stuff. Right, you should see some of the power being made and manifest. And I think one of the things that's cool is if you go, and I encourage everyone, this is a thought exercise and an actual practice I did, just go out and talk to as many people who've walked in faith for as long as you know, and ask them, hey, tell me a crazy moment. A lot of times they'll tell you things they forgot. They're like, oh my gosh, there was this thing, or whether it's a survival story or whether they met someone, right? And even the most jaded individual will share oh my gosh, there was this moment. There's stuff I've forgotten, right? And you go, how would I forget that? That was so powerful in the moment. And so I do think it's fair, and I think it's part of going after God is to say, hey, look, I want to go out and see that. And that's why throughout the scriptures, God is telling him, hey, constantly make a stone of remembrance, make a monument. Don't forget what I did here, right? And I think that's something we kind of lost along the way, is celebrating the fact of hey, look what you did. And that gives me faith for the future. And to know that no matter what befalls me, right? I know God's with me. So even if the healing doesn't happen in the way I want, and I want to be so clear about that because I'm deeply sensitive to this. I had a dear friend die of brain cancer. And it's we prayed, we did all the things, and it didn't work, right? That is tragic, and that is awful. That does not negate the story that Billy just told. And part of the experience of walking in faith is to hold those two things in tension and trust that in the end, right, things will be made known, things will be healed. But in the meantime, we still have every permission to go after it and to go out. And I would just say, asking people what evidence they would accept is really interesting too, right? I've met and interviewed people I interviewed, or one guy wrote me a note for Exorcist Files, and he goes, I just can't believe this. I will never accept that Jesus was divine. I said, great, that's intellectually honest, but what do you? So there's nothing I could say or do. There's no amount of experiences over time that would inform you or make you convinced, right? And that's something that Billy kind of alluded to in talking with some of the more agnostic folks. Is it is a fair question. What would you accept? what would actually take for you to do it? And that's something we all kind of have to like privately wrestle with. So I think it's great. I think everyone should study them. At the very least, it gives you hope. If not in the Christian God, that at least there's something really cool going on that is bigger than you, and that should be exciting for everyone.
Yeah.
Billy, I'll throw it back to you. The United States of America, vibe shift. Let's take it and ramp it up to a spiritual revival. Where does all this fall in?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really interesting because miracles are the evidence of what God is doing, right? If you can prove the miracles are happening, then you're sort of saying, okay, well, this is actually what it looks like when God is active. So when you have a campus where there are 30,000 students and 7,000 show up to hear about God, which just happened, right? This is happening almost every day at this point. You have to say to yourself, well, what's drawing them in? I think you have a lot of people right now who are very, very, very attracted to the idea that they would like to see proof of what they've just accepted. If you accept Jesus, you become a Christian. Well, now I want to see what that looks like. And you have to be discerning. I think that the problem with the miracle stories, and I'm a natural skeptic, even though I'm a Christian. So I want you to prove it to me. I want you to prove to me that what you're saying is true. And I think people have that natural inclination, while at the same time, I'm completely open. I mean, every story we covered in the documentary, I felt like was compelling and believable and true in the end, right? And so you want to look at the evidence, but I think the evidence points them back to God. And that's why it's so important that we talk about these things, whether it's exploring evil and understanding what that looks like. And that's a complicated topic. There's a lot of debate around it. Or whether that's looking at miracles and how God, behaves. And I love what Ryan said too. I mean, we had to deal with that too in the documentary. In fact, the doctor, Dr. Crandall, I mentioned, who prayed over the dead body, he had lost his son not long before that to leukemia. And they spent 4 years praying that their son would survive. This was a child. They ended up having twins. He and his wife couldn't conceive. They get this miracle of having these babies. And then they lose a 12-year-old, one of them when he reaches 12, to leukemia. And yet he had to make a decision. Was he going to be angry and bitter at God? Or was he going to lean in and say, you know what, God, this wasn't how I wanted it to end, but I'm going to be open to you. And because he chose that, this doctor is seeing people get healed all the time of all sorts of things. Not every time, but all the time he's seeing this happen. So there's so much to unpack there. But I love one more thing, what Ryan said about the tension, this belief that a miracle is possible, that God can heal you, and that you need to believe that till your last minute, till your last breath. Fight for that while also trusting fully in whatever God's plan and will is. That's a tough thing to do, but if you're truly going to die to yourself and trust God, having those two things in tension is the healthiest way to live.
Yeah. So many Americans turn to self-help books. Psychedelics are becoming popular, New Age religion. But as Christians, we know that there's something else out there that can help heal people and help them sort of live their daily lives and face triumphs and tragedies and all that. So as Christians and even Jews, how should we respond to the hunger for the supernatural?
How can we, and you were referring to Advil, right? That's what helps us endure, I've noticed after hitting 30, the amount of my friends that carry around Advil for every endeavor, that's one of the blessings there. But Gates, can you rephrase the question at the end there? I want to make sure I answer it correctly.
Well, I just think that, Christians have a role here to respond to the supernatural, to the power of spirituality. We're not all perfect in the way we practice, but,
sure.
We could sort of be better at fighting the forces that everyone else is using to solve their ills and problems.
Yeah, I think so. Here's a great one. In the scriptures, it says that you should be ready to give an account for what you believe at all times, right? And now, a lot of us, I think, interpret that, inadvertently as apologetics, and that's great, that's fun, but I've never had a productive conversation with someone where I've convinced them, because at the end of the day, I can't prove God's real. I also can't prove the origins of the universe, so we're just going to end up fighting and whatever. It's but what really does convince people is when they see someone and they go, man, hey Gates, you seem reasonably intelligent despite what you say on this show. You seem to be a person of means and generosity, and I like how you live your life. What are you doing? What's your secret? And then also, I think we have an obligation to be honest and forthcoming when you are entrusted with a miracle. It's not just God doing something that's hey, I'm helping out my son. And so I would actually spin it back to you, Gates. What's a time in your own journey when God did something for you, right? And it doesn't have to be he, healed a broken rib or he disappeared a tumor. Like, it's as much of a miracle. Was there a radical reconciliation? Did he come through financially? Was it, hey, I had this, I was just going in a downward spiral, and I was surrounded by people who comforted me and lifted me up, right, etc. And being able to say with non-absolutism, just to look someone in the eye and be like, hey, I'm Gates Garcia, and I don't have all the answers figured out, but let me tell you a moment that God felt really real to me. And you tell someone that story, and like, God's given you a gift to say, look, I'm entrusting you with a story. I've got a story like that. Billy's got a story like that. A story that you tell people and they go, wow, like, I don't know, man, but it sticks with them, right? And it like a thorn, it just gets there, and you're like, man, I don't know what that. So actually, Gates, let me ask you, do you have a story? And I don't put you on the spot, it's your show, but like, is there a moment that stands out for you in your walk that's like, man, this was a really cool God moment for me?
It's this show. I had gone out to California I got nominated for the Claremont Institute Lincoln Fellowship. I thought I was woefully underqualified for it. I thought getting nominated for it was a joke. I went through the steps in the process and said, I'll just, out of respect for the person that nominated me, I'll sort of, complete the process. And by some act of God, I was deemed qualified for that fellowship. And so I went out to California and I spent 10 days out there. The fellowship is sort of a PhD level understanding of the founding of this country in 10 days. I mean, the amount of information that it starts at 8 in the morning and it goes to about midnight every night. And you're being taught by some of the most foregone experts in these fields in the world. And so I'm sitting out there and something just was feeling off about the whole experience. I sort of felt guilt that I wasn't going to be able to capitalize on this unbelievable opportunity that was being given to me. I looked at sort of what I was doing in my current life, my profession, where did this fit in? And I couldn't figure it out. And so I'm flying back to Tampa from LA, and it's a 4+ hour flight. A lot of time to think. Usually I read, usually I watch something, and I didn't really do that. I just kind of sat in my thoughts for a while. And it's corny to say this, but it actually isn't on this episode because we're talking about how these things happen. It was the first time in my life that I actually felt God kind of tap me on the shoulder and say, hey, buddy, I did this for a reason. And there is a way that you can use this to make the world a better place. And this was 6 months before my 40th birthday. And so I started thinking about, where does the timing fit into all this? And God literally told me to go home and spend the next 6 months of my life figuring out what I was going to do for the next 40 years. And without going through everything, there's sort of some weird skill sets, some interests, some talents that I've always had sort of innately in me. I've never been able to sort of exploit them for the good. But I knew I had them. And I just said, why do I have these interests? Why do I have this skill set? Why has God allowed me or created me to be the communicator I am, but I've never actually used that as a tool to improve the world? So I spent 6 months discerning this. God was with me throughout that entire process. I was scared isn't the word, but I was hesitant to bring this to my family, having run my family business for the last 10 years and say, I'm being called to do something else. And the more I talked about it, the more I articulated it, the more support I got. My family was overly supportive of this and said, we'll do everything in our efforts to help you on this journey. And you need to go do this. And I felt like every conversation I had that I thought was going to go one way went another way. And I could feel God in all those conversations. But I'm telling you, Ryan, had I not had that moment where God came and talked to me, we wouldn't be sitting here having this interview. So I have shared that story with as many people as possible. And I think what you're getting at is that miracles are miraculous, but if we only allow them to happen to the individual that's directly affected by the miracle, they're good, but we can make them so much greater. We can sort of compound that miracle and use it to not just affect our lives, but affect others. I think storytelling is the one of the most important ways to change the world. That's what the shows like this do. They tell stories. We have an obligation to tell our stories. If we keep them to ourselves, less people will believe, and we're trying to get more people to believe in these things. So it's the first time I've been put on the spot on the show, Ryan. I appreciate that. I'm going to quickly get off the spot and turn the interview back around to you all. Billy, you brought up a point a couple weeks ago when we were talking that more and more atheists are coming out saying, yes, I'm an atheist, but I wouldn't vote for an atheist for president. What does that say?
Yeah, it's very interesting. There have even been some studies and some claims that atheists are increasingly bringing their kids to church, right? So they don't believe, but they're bringing their kids to church. Well, why? Because they see a value in it. They see that going to church, having faith, actually provides structure and provides positive benefits. And by the way, I track this because I'm very interested in this. By every discernible measure, in every study that we've seen, mental health, happiness, go down the line, people who read the Bible regularly and go to church regularly perform better in all of those things. They are happier people. I'm not making this up. Science backs it. And we're sort of seeing these parallel things happen. Even atheists, some of them seeing the value and then seeing the science back what we already know. If it's true, and not everybody believes this who's watching or listening, that the Bible is real and true, and if it's true that Christianity is the truth, then you should see science backing that. And we do see that quite a bit on every measure. So, and again, I bring up the behaviors of reading the Bible and going to church because they're indicative. I can say I'm a Christian all day long, but am I doing the things that are evidence of being a Christian? Those are things that are evidence of that faith. As far as who you would vote for, this is interesting, and it was actually Essie Cupp back in 2012 who first said this, and it struck me and it made headlines. I think she was on MSNBC, and I've written about this and I've talked to her about it. I used to work with her at the Blaze. You know, very fascinating. She said in this interview, I am an atheist, but I would not vote for an atheist candidate. And everybody was shocked. And they were like, well, why? And she's like, I want whoever is running for office to have something above them that they're afraid of, something above them that they actually feel accountable to. The idea that you would run for president, assume the presidency, and not have any sort of inkling that there's somebody that you're accountable to was scary to her, even as an atheist. And I thought, that makes a lot of sense, right? Like if you're actually thinking it through, you're accountable, not just to yourself, but to a higher power. And so I'll stop there, but I think it speaks to, even in the hearts of people who say they don't believe, I think that there is an accountability factor that they want to be accountable maybe to something bigger and better.
All right, so I want to talk about preserving freedom in America. Miracles, they remind me of true freedom. They almost sort of tell me that, ultimately freedom comes from God, not from the government. Where do miracles play into sort of the celebration and the preservation of freedom in America?
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously there's that. I mean, the whole narrative of Scripture is that Christ came to free us from ourselves, from sin, to abolish the works of the devil, right? And so it is for freedom that Christ has set you free. Right. And so anything that points you towards a higher reality that fixes our eyes not on our immediate circumstances, because again, like the three of us are speaking today from enormous positions of privilege and opportunity, not only from a current timestamp, but like just in the context of global society and history. I mean, the fact that we have medical care and roofs over our heads, and there's not like barbaric hordes like ready to storm our gate. I mean, we have such a unique position right now. But all to say, even with that, there's still hardships and there's still the awful things that are going to transpire and happen. And so anything that causes us to not get caught up in what is focused on, because at the end of the day, we're all going to die. We're all going to face, like we all get sick. We all just have things that happen to us. And so anything that goes against that cultural narrative, that worldly narrative that said this is all there is, right? Because if there is all there is, I'd freak out about a lot of stuff. But when you talk about freedom, if it is true, and I always like saying if, right? Because like I'm 99% sure it's right. I could be totally wrong, right? Maybe we're all living in a simulation that Elon's running, right? That's the next viable option. But I'm still more confident that the Christian narrative is true. But even then, it's like, like if I trust that ultimately, right, that there's something better beyond this, which we should, because as awesome as things are, for a lot of the world, it's hell. There's hurricanes and tsunamis and sex trafficking, and I mean, it's awful. Cancer,
terrorism,
it's awful. And so I love, even if I'm biased and wishful things, like I love dwelling on things that serve as a subtle, covert reminder that, hey, this is not all there is, and one day, right, all these wrongs will be righted. We'll be reunited with people we love. Everyone should want this to be true, right? I would love to see people that have gone on to glory. I'd love to hang out with my close friends for eternity. You know, Billy, I hope you get in. It'd be cool to hang out with you in eternity too. But you know, that's the kind of reason I like dwelling on miracles, because it's just subtle fingerprints that, like, hey, this is not all there is, right? So don't stress, don't worry, because in the end, this is a blip, and it's pointing towards something much bigger and grander. And I think that would translate well into also how we make decisions for our policies and governments too, right? I mean, take out the coveting and the immediacy of the moment of self-serving, right? And suddenly, what if revival swept all our like governmental leaders, right? And they started thinking with multi-generational impact, right? And like just take out the corruption and the crony, which, you know, on both sides, right? Imagine what that would do to our governance, right? Like, it would be awesome. Like people, if people were spirit filled and going out and like emptying the foster care system and, you know, and feeding the homeless, like imagine all these things. One last point just to get off my pedestal here, but Alexis de Tocqueville, right? Democracy in America. Everyone should read that. This guy writes and goes, it's amazing. Like the church is meeting all the needs. This is before the large scale safety net was instituted. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but I'm just saying, like, he recognized, like, look at what the church is doing. This is amazing. And so we should all want a strong, robust, healthy church helping combat and redeem the earth. And so that's something I get like excited about, and I think it'd help our country.
Billy, I want you to chime in on the role of miracles and God versus, you know, government and where freedom plays in. But I do want to mention Ryan brings up natural disasters. The last time the three of us were staring at each other through screens, I believe Ryan's computer or laptop fell on the ground because he experienced a real life earthquake in the middle of
that was so scary. And I have a lot of faith, but a 6.5 earthquake with like 15 miles from the epicenter, I was like, peace, y'all. I thought it was over. I was like, all right. But, you know, it would have been an honor to go out with you guys. Like, that'd be a great show as you're doing a show on miracles and the guy documenting it just passes away in an earthquake. And you're like, not good for branding, guys.
Good knowing you, buddy. Billy, what say you on freedom, government, God, miracles?
Yeah, you know, I think it's so interesting because the world has sort of taught us that, you know, relying on God and sticking with his standards is somehow a form of slavery, when in reality it is what freedom is, and it is it's what opens us up to the miraculous, being able to be accountable and have standards that we live to, that there's actually freedom in that. And I think when you look at our country and you look at where we are right now is in a very complicated, interesting place. A lot of people are super excited about where they sort of see things moving and the trajectory. And I think, though, that when you think about how we got here, it really has to do with abandoning some of those principles as a culture, allowing things that weren't true to be peddled as truth, and a lot of us being silent because we were afraid. And yeah, I think right now it's a real clarifying moment. And I think miracles fit into this really beautifully, but it's a real clarifying moment that we feel this freedom to speak the truth, as we should have always felt. If you're going to look at the First Amendment, right, you're going to look at freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of exercise. It may be that people choose to be atheists. They may choose to be whatever, right? But they have that choice, they have that ability, and it's up to us to maintain that, and it's incredibly essential that we maintain that in this country. It's what America was built on. We haven't always exercised it or lived it out perfectly, but this idea that we were moving away from that, and that certain parties even had platforms that not only moved away from it, they wanted to enact things and started to enact things that were directly contrary to that. You know, you can't expect to be, and then I'll get off my soapbox, but a blessed nation if everything that you're pursuing and doing is contrary to what the truth is, and you're claiming it's true when it's actually not only a lie, but it's damaging, dangerous, harmful to people. And so we're in a really unique place right now, but I think where miracles fit into that is, again, being able to look at things that are happening that point to the real truth that is beyond anything we can see. It's beyond what we can see with our eyes, but we can experience spiritually. And so my hope is that we lean more into that as individuals and as a culture.
It's so easy to, and my show's all positive vibes. We try to bring hope to people, but it's easy to talk about positive things, and we've done a lot of that on this show. Miracles are a very positive thing, but in studying miracles, what haunts you, or what should we be on guard for?
Ryan, you can start that one.
What haunts me? Oh man. Well, again, we talked about this tension of like, when you see someone get healed or radical, like another really cool story from the show. Like, I mean, the episode we just released today with my good friend Riley Kehoe, she survived the awful tsunami in Thailand in 2004. But you know what? 200,000 people, I think, died in that thing, right? So it'd be very easy to say, well, like one miracle versus all that, but it's like, no, we should celebrate. Like, a lot of people die from cancer, and it's tragic and horrible, and I hate cancer, and I wish it wasn't here. But I'm also going to celebrate when someone gets healed, right? I have a good family friend who got healed of leukemia by doctors, not miraculous, just was like, but maybe it is, right? Just great wisdom, good treatment, and completely healed. And you go, okay. So the haunting, though, is why God, trying to figure out, and that's just always the mistake, why trying to put God in a box, say, why did you heal this person? Why did you heal someone's shoulder and then let that little girl die, right? I don't know. But again, if you trust, and it sounds like the ultimate cop-out, I get it. Like, it just sounds so awful to people, right? But it's like, look, but if it's true, if there is a God who is omnipotent, omnipresent, and omniscient, and knows everything, 10D chess, right? Then I have to assume that there's some moral reason in the end why he is unfolding things. And that's where we just have to turn to our scriptures, and we'll get made fun of for it, which is why I love Paul's line that, we are fools, right? To all those, we preach Christ and we're considered fools, right? For all the perishing, we're fools. But it's like all things work for the good. They have to. That's just the end of the day. And even, if we get into spiritual warfare too, that's something too, where it's like, why is God, if it's true, why does he permit don't we have enough problems? Don't I make enough bad decisions? I don't need an adversary, coaching me, right? I can ruin my life just fine on my own. But no, apparently there's a whole legion, no pun intended, of unseen awful critters that are out there trying to sow discord. And yet, in the end, God's like, I'm going to use that too, right? Yeah. I'm going to use that. And you see that around the world where people get rescued from some really crazy stuff. And suddenly they're like, whoa, if the enemy attacks and shows you that kind of evil power, and suddenly you're this is another, people ask all the time, well, where's the tapes? Show me I want to see someone crawling up a wall. It's like, no, you don't. You definitely don't want to see that. I've never seen that. I don't want to see that. But if you did see that, and then you're like, come down in Jesus' name, and it obeyed, you get where the scripture comes from, where the disciples come back being like, teacher, the demons submit to us. This is crazy. And she's like, I know, that is very cool. However, that's not the reason to get excited. And so there's an agenda out there. There is some sort of evil agenda, and why it's allowed, I don't know, but it's for God's glory that somehow he's going to use it. And again, that's why I think we have an obligation to document the victories, because it's war. We're all living in a war, and it's important to celebrate all the good things. And one last thought on this thing, maybe you both think about this sometimes, or maybe I'm just weird for this, but do you ever just think about how tough life would be? As awesome as it is right now, just think about life 100 years ago. Right. And you just think about all the stuff that you're the idea that the 3 Gates, you got to sit there and be like, this is what I want to do for a job. 200 years ago, be like, no, you're a farmer. That's it. Your dad was a farmer. He was a farmer. You're going to farm. And if there's no crops, you don't eat. And it's that's what it is. And you had kids.
And there's no Instacart. There's no Instacart, which would be a problem for me.
What do you do pre-Instacart? Right. It's what do you do with that? And I think that is just part of documenting miracles, is also the little things like this. Celebrate the fact that you can have Ethiopian food delivered to your house in 2 hours. Saying this for a friend, right? It's going to happen.
All right. So last question before I ask you all to sort of plug all your work and let everybody know where to find you. But I want each of you to answer the following. So what do you say to the person that loves America, but has lost faith in its future and maybe even lost faith in God?
My advice to people when I hear these things, whether it's faith or it's, I think all of that can be very tied together in light of how chaotic everything is, right? You turn the news on, it's chaotic, is to humble yourself. And what harm is there in turning yourself back to prayer, right? Even if you're not sure what you believe, if you're not sure God's even there, saying, God, if you're there, show me. Right? I think back to the 4-leaf clover story that Ryan shared. It's if you're there, God, just give me a sign and show me. And you know what? I'm not happy right now about this country. I'm not happy about my faith. I'm mad at you, God, whatever it is, just kind of opening yourself up and saying, you know what? Show me the truth. Give me the signs that will point me to what I should believe, how I should think, how I should feel even, because feelings can be very tricky and manipulative even, but it's important to be aware of them. So I would just say, humble yourself before God. And I will also throw in on the haunting front, because I don't want to forget to say this. I think the thing that has haunted me in the last couple of months since working on my Miracles project has been, if we say miracles aren't real, if we say we don't believe in them, whether you're an atheist, agnostic, or even a Christian who thinks they've ceased and they don't happen anymore, are we possibly trapping people who would have otherwise had healing by discouraging them from believing, by saying to them, miracles don't happen anymore, don't worry about it. And we're in this position of actually pushing them away from trying to believe and hold that tension in a healthy place. That actually haunts me. And I've thought, have I done that to people? Am I guilty of like discouraging people from believing what is possible in their lives? And so that's something that does haunt me. But yeah, I would just encourage people, turn to prayer and turn to God, even if you don't want to.
Ryan.
Yeah, I mean, it's frustrating, but like it also doesn't matter, right? Because it's like, if the Bible's true, God says, I will reveal myself when you seek me with your whole heart. And I ask people, all the time, like, what have you sought with your whole heart, right? And for a lot of us, it's like, and this was me for a while too, it's like, hey, I asked God to do this very specific thing. He didn't do it, ergo he's not real, right? And it can be very heartbreaking. And dude, I get it. Like, if you sincerely sought the Lord on stuff, and then I have a dear friend, that was his story, and he was really, really involved in his church center, and then he lost a loved one and just totally was like, I'm done. And it's heartbreaking and it's awful, and it's like, but it's like, okay, we don't know. In the end of the day, if God is who he says he is, right, then we have to have humility with that. But I would say, be honest. Like, my best breakthrough moments have come when I was really viscerally honest. I mean, that's why he gave us the Psalms. I mean, you see David pleading outright and arguing, like, my friends torment me, I'm sick, I've sinned so greatly I can barely sleep, I'm crying all night. Like, any emotion you've ranged. I mean, our Savior is bleeding from worry in the garden, right, on this final night. It's like, all that stuff is fair game, right? And it's nothing that he's not unacquainted with. So I would go after it hardcore and say, all right, I'm going to find out. I'm going to pursue it with the same intensity that I would if I was like trying to study writing, or if I was trying to study, like, I think about all the passion we channel into our fitness journeys and all the influences we follow and all the books we read, etc. It's like, do the same thing for the spiritual walk. Go out there, find any Christian you can and ask him, hey, tell me a story of what God did. And then essentially you hear enough of them and you go, something's going on here. That is something you do. I promise you, you will walk away a changed person. If you interview a bunch of people, and it can be, that's the thing, it can just be like a friend of yours that lives up the street is like, hey, by the way, like, you're a Christian, why? Has there been something that's happened? And like, you start collecting stories. It will just open your mind, and you'll realize these are hidden in plain sight. They're everywhere. And I would say that's very cool. And because that's ultimately, our identity has to be rooted in the fact that we are human beings made in the image of God. You touched on that earlier, Gates, which is like, governments will come and go. They will grant rights, they will state rights, etc. But at the end of the day, we recognize that we have inherent value because we are human beings made in the image of God. Not because a majority of people got together in a building in Washington and voted and said that's what rights we have. We have rights that transcend that. And that's why it's important to put America in the proper place, right? God first, right? America will fail you at times, right? It's an amazing country, but it's not perfect, and it will fail. And that's why it's important to, like, I think, keep the eternal perspective that if you are made in the image of God, then you have something that no government can ever take away from you. And that's a reason to celebrate.
All I can say to that is amen. Where can we find you guys? What are you working on? I mentioned a lot of it in the intro, but I'd rather you sort of share it in your own words. Billy, you can go first.
Yeah, so my website's billyhallowell.com. I've got everything I'm working on there. A podcast called Into the Supernatural that's going on right now. But the big thing is Investigating the Supernatural Miracles, which is a documentary you can stream at cbn.com/supernatural.
Ryan.
You can go to exorcistfiles.tv if you want to listen to all the spiritual warfare madness. It's really cool, 3D reenactments of really profound spiritual warfare cases. And then you can head to heavenmeetsearth.com. That's heavenmeetsearth.com, which is where we have our new podcast documenting miracles, answered prayers, and all the stuff that you wish we had talked about today instead of getting on our theological rants. So if you want to hear what we actually document on there, you can head there. It's available on Apple, Spotify, Amazon, or wherever you get your podcast. Some have called it the next best podcast since We the People.
Well, gentlemen, you're friends, you're good men, you're doing great work. Thank you for spending some time with We the People.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Godspeed.
We the people. Why you quiet? It's time to stand up for the truth. And they coming for our kids, so who gon' stand up for the youth? Ay, and we know we win because Yeshua is the proof. Ay, we the people like Garcia, so that's no excuse.